Hello lovely people, I'm K3N and welcome to week 21 of our Slowstitch project for 2024. I'm filming this way in advance, so I hope I make sense when I talk about past, present and future, because today for me is Tuesday the 6th of May, somewhere around there, because I'm going to England on Thursday. Anyway, the theme for this week is mending as healing, and it kind of follows on from Pocket Week. I'm sorry, my glasses are steaming up. Kind of follows on from Pocket Week, where we looked at visible mending, and also I lost Sirius, as you all know. And that is a theme for me that I've come across in my own practice and in other people's commentaries and so on before. That stitching itself or crafting or doing something creative of any kind is a healing process. And I wanted to look at Japanese Boro itself for some time. I looked at it briefly, or as one of my textile tradition inspirations in Diversity Week, when we looked at textile traditions that had inspired us. And I wanted to share with you this, which I call the Crumbs of Comfort cloth. And when I lost my dad in 2019, it was a few months before I stitched a single stitch. I just couldn't, because to me the emotional connection with the process of stitching, it was just too much. I did knitting and crocheting and journaling and so on, but no stitching. Until one day my mum came round with some of my dad's shirts and hankies, and I started joining some little scraps of his hankies together. Can I find the middle? So here are some hankies and a couple of bits of indigo dyed bits of his shirt, cotton shirt, form this centre square, and I made this one little centre square, and then I put some squares around it, and then I indigo dyed some more of the cloths, and it grew and it grew and it grew, and it ended up being, now you can't see me anymore. And it's still a work in progress. It's been on the go now for 4 years, there or thereabouts, and I still stitch on it now and then. But I backed it just with a sheet. I pieced the top, I backed it with a sheet. There's no wadding or anything in it, it's quite fine. And then I started doing a lot of Boro-inspired stitching over it. And in it, as well as the precious cloths that were my dad's clothes and hankies, I had some actual Boro, which someone had given me, some little scraps of it that I'd been hoarding for several years and not wanting to use because it was so precious. And there's some there. I'll come a bit closer. Can you see here? This is a piece of actual Boro. So I thought, well, Boro has had such a huge influence on me. I feel quite passionately, as I talked in Kawandi Week, about respecting traditions that I draw upon. And part of the respect for me is learning as much as I can about them. Not just looking at the product of that tradition and copying it or being inspired by it, but trying to understand the culture and the peoples and so on behind it as best I can. So I wanted to share that with you. So in terms of technique and what we'll be doing, we're going to make something inspired by Boro, and I'm going to talk a little bit about mending as healing. Okay, so here I am at my desk. This week, for a change, I'm not going to start with a foundation cloth and work onto it. I'm going to just work with scraps and join them together, until they're the size to fit in my journal. So all I've got here is a pile of scraps. Now I indigo dye, so I have indigo scraps. You don't have to use indigo dyed cloth. It doesn't even have to be blue. You can use, if you've got precious scraps of people's clothes, your loved ones' clothes, or whatever, just some little scraps. And to stitch them together with, I've got it's white cotton. I don't know exactly what it is. It's not proper Sashko cotton. I'll talk more about that as I go along. Proper Sashko cotton is spun and twisted a certain way to make it really soft so that it really beds in and becomes part of the cloth. I don't have any, so I'm going to use this. You don't even have to use white, it's just, sort of traditional, although you do see other colours. So just some thread to stitch with, basically, whatever. And I've got my needle. I've got a slightly bigger needle than normal because my thread's thicker. I think that's a 7. I think it's a Tulip 7, but you know, a needle that's comfortable for your thread. And some scissors, still my old ones because I haven't been to England yet, although by the time you see this I'll have just come back from England. Bizarre. Anyway, so that's what you'll need: some scraps, some thread, a needle and some scissors. As simple as that. And I'm just going to start with something. Now I've got this bit here which I pulled out of my scraps, which I've trimmed off something else. I think it was a journal cover, which has already got stitching in, so I may or may not add that at one point, you know. So and it's even got a bit of machine stitching in there, but in the spirit of borrow, of mending, of using what you have, I thought that was maybe nice. And here's another bit. This actually was the shoulder strap of a pinny, an apron that I used to wear in the garden until it completely fell apart. It was much mended, and parts of it are in the apron, my forager's apron, which is or was in the exhibition in England. So that was part of it that was patched with indigo. So if you have little scraps like that that have already got stitch in, I think it gives character straight away. If you don't, then, you know, just scraps of cloth. I've got some fine denim. You often see people making Boro-inspired pieces with denim because it's, you know, indigo and widely available. Thought I had a bit here somewhere. I don't really like to, oh there's a bit, I don't really like to use really thick denim because it's thick basically, and it's not comfortable to stitch through, unless you can find the really, you know, the finer stuff. And this here, I got it to show you, I don't know if I'll include it. This is a last little precious piece of some kimono that a friend gave me. She had pieces of it and she shared pieces with some of her friends, you know, to kind of spread it around. And this is, you've maybe seen me use some of it before because I speculated about how it was, you know, different on each side. I still don't have a definitive answer. Anyway, but this piece, I've been taking pieces of cloth around and I've kept this piece because it's got original stitching in it, where it's been patched and mended. So I don't think I'm going to use it in this piece, but I just wanted to show it to you. So that's that precious little thing. But I have got some tiny little offcuts of it that I might use. Do you see? Tiny, tiny scraps. Get some cloth and a needle and thread. It's pretty much what I say every week, more or less. That's a bit of indigo dyed thread. I did a workshop years ago in England, stitching Sashko designs, you know, the white on blue designs, or usually white on blue. And that's an offcut of a piece of that. So again, it's got the stitching in already. I used some of that as well in my dad's quilt that I showed you earlier. So I'm just I've got my needle threaded already. In traditional Sashko, you don't use a knot, and you use a Sashko needle and Sashko thread, like I said. I'm not going to do that. To me, that's not... I've learnt about that. I've seen the proper way with the Sashko thimble, and I'm going to talk about somebody whose YouTube channel you can go and have a look at and watch him, a gentleman called Atsushi, who's Japanese but now lives in the States, stitching with the long Sashko needle, you know, with the rocking motion. I haven't mastered that, and I'm not going to pretend or try. I'm just going to stitch normally. But if you do know how to do that and you have a Sashko needle, Sashko thread, and that's what you want to do, then you go for it. So I'm just going to pick up 2 bits. I think I'm going to start with this little bit of my pinny. I might pull that bit of green out. And I'm going to behave as if this is a little scrap of a piece of clothing or a household, you know, cloth item that I want to mend. And I'm just going to sew another piece to it. And then I'm just going to go on building it up, sewing. I might turn it over and stitch from the other side, as if I'm mending, you know, in that spirit of mending. And as I do so, I will talk as usual. So I can't really tell you what I'm going to do because I don't really know. I can't even choose a piece of cloth. I think I'm going to take some of this and stitch it on. See, here is a place that you would want to mend, but we're kind of, well, we're faking it, let's just be honest, because you can't make Boro. Boro is something that grows, that evolves, that develops. You can't say, I'm going to make a piece of Boro. So I think I'm gonna just cut that maybe slightly longer than the ground piece and just stitch it onto it. I'm not going to use a knot, I'm just going to start stitching. And the gentleman I mentioned at Sushi, I will link one of his videos where he talks about Boro, and he says himself that he is not a Boro expert, he is a Sashiko master, and his family were Sashiko masters, but he does have a little video talking about Boro and what Boro is. And he tells a story about a farmer who has a jacket that is mended by his wife as it tears. And then it's mended again, and because, you know, through poverty and thrift and need. I want to go over there now. Actually, I'm going to just stitch on through one layer of cloth. You know, and that jacket is precious because it was the only jacket he had, you know? It's the only jacket he had. So if it gets a hole in it, then it has to be patched. And it wasn't that his wife was making something beautiful, it was through need. And there is some shame associated with that as well, that it's important to recognise. That, you know, the shame of poverty, which isn't particular to Japanese. I remember my grandmother being ashamed of poverty, and it's kind of in the same spirit as wearing your best clothes for church or a party or whatever. You wouldn't turn up in your old clothes. So it's, I mean, we look at these Boro pieces now. Boro, rewind. I shouldn't assume that everybody knows what Boro is, or, you know. Boro means rags in Japanese. The word Boro means rags, as closely as you can translate it. And sashiko, sash is the Japanese word for stab or pierce. And if you put ko on the end of a word in Japanese, it makes it a diminutive. So you'll see sashiko translated as little stabs, but ko is like, I can only think of in Dutch, they put y on the end of things to make them little, like snoepjes is sweeties. So snoep is sweet, you know, candy, and if you put y on the end, it's sweeties, you know, it's that. So sashiko is little stabs, and this is sashiko. Sashiko is not only those patterns that you see where you mark with chalk and stitch. Sashiko is literally just the stitching. So now I think I'm going to turn over and add another piece onto the other side, or I might just stitch myself back there. And you get, when you do sashiko properly, you go and watch Atsushi do it, you get a very distinctive look to the stitching. And he says something very interesting in one of his videos. I mean, he's got a whole channel, you know, you can watch him for hours if you want to. He says something very interesting about when you concentrate on the stitches, they won't be even. When you concentrate on the rhythm, then they will. I liked that. I thought that was, because I know a lot of you have said about your stitches not being even and how do you get your stitches even and straight lines and so on. I thought that's good advice. Don't concentrate on the stitches, concentrate on the rhythm of stitching. And he also calls, I don't want to sit here for an hour and a half repeating everything that Atsushi says, but he also calls Boro invisible mending. You know, in Pockets Week we talked about the visible mending movement, and I talked about how it's kind of a way of saying you were here, you mended, but you were there and, you know, you did work. And that's one of the reasons why we make it visible. You see, I'm now going to stitch this to this, and that's going to hide the stitches on the back of that piece, but that doesn't matter. I'm kind of trying to imitate a time lapse, if you will, that this is something that's happened over time. And while I'm doing it, if I wasn't talking to you at the same time, I would be thinking about, you know, all the people who've ever had to mend because they had to, because the cloth was precious. And I can't remember what I was saying about Atsushi now. About the rhythm of the stitches, yeah. Yes, and that, you know, I mean, we find the aesthetic beauty, those of us who appreciate this kind of thing, in, oh yes, visible mending, that was it, in pieces like Boro and, you know, other things like Kawandi and Kantha and patchwork, you know, patchwork that was done before cloth was printed and people bought new cloth and made things, you know, using English paper piecing, you know, using scraps of worn-out cloth through thrift. And because cloth was precious before it was being commercially produced, in Japan it would have been cotton, it would have been maybe hemp, and indigo dyed because indigo was a plant that farmers could grow themselves to colour their cloth. And now these pieces, you'll see them in museums and galleries and, you know, places online or whatever, changing hands for a lot of money. And I think if you could go back in time to those peasant farmers, they would be amazed. They would be amazed because there was, like I said, something almost shameful about it, that they had to, because they were poor. And I think that is important to understand and acknowledge that now we can, you know, of course there are still poor people in the world, but we're not poor. We're not poor in that sense of being poor. All of you watching me have got access to a computer of some kind, otherwise you couldn't be watching me. You know, it's all relative, isn't it? But you know what I'm saying. I hope nobody's wondering where their next meal's coming from. I'm just trying to sew this little bit onto here. And now, while you know me, if you've been here for any length of time, the value of cloth and why I use old cloth. Well, there's two reasons for that. One is an aesthetic reason. I actually prefer it. I prefer the feel of it and the look of it and the way it stitches and handles and so on. And the other is because of, you know, environmental, sustainable grounds. But that's a choice I've made. You know, I've made a conscious choice. I could, of course, go and buy new cloth if I wanted to. I'm going to just join another bit here somewhere, I think. Let's have some of this. This is a bit of very old sheet that I indigo dyed. This is, I know from experience you don't even need to nick it. It's so soft you can just rip it. And it got folded and left in the sun, and I didn't finish the indigo properly, otherwise that wouldn't have happened. But now that has happened, I quite like that. And I think it's been in the washing machine with a tissue or something, because it's got all little bits of, you know, paper stuck to it. You know that thing? You know that thing? It's usually one of the children guilty of putting something in the wash with a tissue in it. So I'm just going to patch behind just like that, and just go and start stitching that way. So, yeah, and another thing I wanted to say, I said before, I've said it in Kawandi week, and I said it, I think, when we did in the diversity week, about using the word inspired, rather than saying I'm making a piece of Boro, I'm making a Kawandi, I'm making a piece of Kantha, or whatever. There was something, again, the famous Atsushi. He's really, you know, he's passionate about his craft and his culture, but he talks about being careful when you use that word inspired, not to use it as a kind of, you know, free pass to then go and do what you like. And I really sat and gave that a lot of thought. There is a danger, I think, that you say, oh well, if I say it's inspired by, in this case, Boro, then, you know, I'm free to go and do what I like with it. I think, to my mind, the most important thing is to learn what you can about. I mean, I know a lot of us are like that about anything and everything, because we want to know, because we're interested. But to me, the learning, you know, the understanding as much as you can, deepens the beauty of something, rather than just looking at something and trying to imitate it. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I'm going to bridge that little gap there with another piece of that little scrap. Seems to be about the right size. Then I'm going to turn over and stitch it from the other side. And yeah, the invisible mending. There's a technique. I call it back patching. I don't know if that's its name, but have mended my jeans in the past, or Hans's jeans, by if they've gone through at the knee, for example, by putting a patch of cloth behind the hole and then doing this kind of stitching over the hole. So the patch is on the back and the stitching, but you know, the stitching is visible from the front. I call that back patching. I don't know if that's, you know, what it's actually called. But you see that a lot in authentic Boro, that the patch is put on the back. And that as well is why you would call it invisible mending, although the stitching's visible. You know, because the patch is on the back, it's not this patchwork of cloth that you see that's done on purpose to look beautiful. No, it's to mend a hole. And the fact that the patch is put inside is kind of a, you know, in an attempt to make the mend invisible rather than visible. So although Boro is viewed as a part of the visible mending movement, it isn't really. It's hard to explain. I hope you understand what I'm saying. It wasn't that people were mending their clothes and making them look beautiful, although I think there will always be an element of that, because humans are, you know, humans do have an aesthetic. You know, an aesthetic. Doesn't need another word, does it? If you go back to ancient cultures, making bowls and vessels or weaving things from plant materials or whatever, putting a pattern in something that was purely intended to be utilitarian is a thing, isn't it, that crops up. So humans do have a sense of the aesthetic, even if you're doing something utilitarian. But what I mean is the intention wasn't, you know, the farmer's jacket to make a beautiful jacket. The intention was to protect the farmer from the sun, or, you know, the elements, farm machinery and so on. Farm machinery, tools, you know what I mean. I feel this is such a big subject and it's so important for me, and I feel I'm not doing it justice. And I think I should maybe just sit here quietly and stitch, and then send you to Atsushi and others who do completely understand. But I'm not going to do that because I can't not talk. I'm just going to get some more thread. But yes, no, I just, you know, that really resonated with me, because I don't think I was guilty of saying, oh, well, I'm saying Boro inspired so I can do what I like. I don't think I thought that, at least I hope I didn't. But it really resonated with me when he said that. Well, resonated with me. It made me stop and think. It sort of stopped me in my tracks. I thought, yeah, that's a good point. I need to sit and give that some thought. Because, yeah, the understanding, ouch, stabbing yourself with your needle, you know, trying to understand culturally where something comes from. Yes, it's about respecting tradition, but it's also about your own, what you get from it. And I don't mean that in a, you know, acquisitive way. I mean, am I making any sense at all? I mean, in terms of creatively, what you get from it, what it gives you, you know, and then sharing that with others as well. So I got my little raggy bit. I might put something here. I don't really want. I'm conscious now that I'm wanting to square it up, so I'm going to resist the urge to square it up just yet. Or at all. I mean, it doesn't have to. Why does it have to be square, Catherine? It doesn't. why does it, doesn't, I mean, I'm obviously thinking of my journal, but it doesn't have to, it could stick out, it could fold, so just challenging myself to go a little bit outside the box. So yeah, just, yeah, I think it's valuable, and I don't think you'd be here if you weren't interested in, the stories and so on. I don't think I would be the person you'd be watching, so I think I'm quite confident in saying, I'm sure you can appreciate that understanding the story of something, the meaning behind it, the history of it, deepens your pleasure in engaging with that in some way by making a little piece inspired by it. The thing is with Boro as well, because it was something that the very poor did, there's no real documentation about it. It wasn't important enough to be recorded in any way, and there are some pieces that have survived, actual pieces. But I haven't really come across anything. It was the same with the pockets, and it was the same with the English paper piecing. They're domestic things. So, the book that I recommended in Pockets Week, where the women that wrote it had to go digging in all kinds of places to try and find out about them. It wasn't a big important thing that had, official documents about it or anything like that. And the same with Kawandi. I mean, I think if it hadn't been for Margaret Fabrizio going to the city people and sitting with them and learning from them and then bringing it back to us, and the person whose name I can't remember, but the person whose exhibition she'd seen, which opened her eyes to Kawandi in the first place, it's those little accidents of history or little happenstances where somebody comes across something and then shares it and brings it to us. And there are many, many instances of that. I mean, the Gee's Bend tradition in the US, the Gee's Bend quilters, although if it wasn't for, a series of events, that would have remained unknown. Because these are all ordinary people all over the world. I'm going to turn over and do some stitching this way on this side now. It's work-a-day, domestic, not deemed important in the grand scheme. It's not, it's not wars and revolutions and, do you know what I mean? Well, the stuff that the history books really, really write about. It's a farmer and his jacket that gets a hole in and then gets mended. And mended again, because it's his only jacket and he can't buy another. You can't just go and buy another jacket. And then when he retires from farming, that jacket will be passed on to his son, and so on. Oops. And we see the beauty in the history and the story of that jacket. And if you can see that jacket itself, you would, well, I would probably cry at the sheer beauty of it. Which is, I think that's, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with finding that jacket beautiful. But at the same time, I do think it is important to recognise that the man who wore that jacket, or the men who wore that jacket through the generations and their lives and what they thought about it. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I want some of this cotton gauze. It's not very good at tearing. I might just cut a bit. I might cut that odd shape bit, since I'm trying to make myself not do everything square. So yeah, just to clarify, Boro is the piece of, the pieced piece of cloth, the pieced piece of cloth, the item, and Sashko is the stitching that creates that item. So Boro stitching is a meaningless thing to say, because stitching on Boro is Sashko. I don't know where to put my triangular piece now. Put it on the other side. And I thought that this exercise as well, you know, borrow aside, of sewing bits together and not on a foundation would also be, certainly for me, a challenge already, because I usually start with a foundation and then you've got a framework, haven't you, and you've got something to build on. Whereas you see this way is much more challenging, and I thought that would be a good exercise as well, yeah, for myself as well, because it's not something I really do much of, but maybe I should do more. I think it's an interesting process. You also notice I'm not using any pins, although they're sitting there. Don't know why I'm not using any pins. If you want to use pins, you go for it. So, you know, if you choose, if you're sitting here now stitching with me, of course that's fine, but I do think I would quite like to, I mean, I do this sort of stitching a lot, usually on a foundation. But what I mean is to just sit with some scraps and stitch them together like this, and think about people that did that because they had to. I think that would be a good exercise in mindfulness. And again, think about the value of the cloth. Try and imagine that a tiny piece of cloth like this is precious. Because it is. It's precious now, not because we don't have enough of it, ironically. It's precious because there's too much of it. And the production of it and the destruction of it is a big, big, big environmental problem. So, yeah, I'm not going to get on my soapbox. You all know how I feel about that. But cloth is still precious, but for almost an opposite reason. I'll use some of my already stitched piece. Somewhere, somehow. Somewhere, somehow. So I want that bit because it's got the red in it. You do see little splashes of other colours here and there in Authentic Boro. The best place to see Authentic Boro, I would say, is, well, Google image, but also if on Pinterest you can find and look for Authentic Boro, not, you know, Boro that, not Boro, Boro that's not Boro, you know what I mean. I'm going to just cut that bit off, I think. It's got a bit of, because it was stitched to a back cloth, but I'm just going to, no, actually I've changed my mind because I'm not keen on the hard edge. Can I fray it a bit? See, I feel a bit bad doing this when I've just said how precious cloth is, because now I feel I'm destroying the cloth. But it's, you know, it's teeny tiny little scraps of cloth that was already second hand, so. I know that there are people who take wire brushes to distress cloth and so on. I guess that's also fine if it's, you know, it's not, I don't make the rules, but I was going to say if it's old cloth, we'll tuck that under. I distress cloth by putting it outside and leaving it for years, or burying it in bundles in the woods, or, you know, things like that. So I don't think there's any real difference between taking a wire brush to it or doing that with it. I'm interested now to see if I can make this bigger chunk with it's already thick to stitch through. And see how I got knots in the thread straight away. If I can make it meld into the... Because when you look at authentic Boro pieces, you don't need to say authentic. All Boro pieces are authentic, otherwise they're not Boro. When you look at them, it's become one cloth. And that's the thing with the proper Seshko thread as well. It's specially plied and twisted, like I said, so that it doesn't sit on the surface, it melds right in. And if I ever came across any vintage sashiko thread, I would be all over it, I can tell you. But this this cotton, I bought it on this. This is a pern from a loom that holds the thread, you know, in a weaving loom. I bought this from a lady in the UK. Can't remember what her name is now, but it may be Swedish because the lady's Swedish, and her, you know, the things that she sold were Swedish, the threads and so on. I don't know if anybody Swedish knows. Please tell me if they recognise this in particular. I know it's a pern. I have perns from, you know, I have perns from the north of England out of the weaving machines, and I don't know if this thread was weaving thread or if it was wound on there afterwards. I don't use this thread very much because it's quite thick, but actually it's not bad to stitch with at all. So yeah, so if you want to see pictures of authentic Boro, and at Sushi also, I only found out recently that he has a YouTube channel. I've been following him on Instagram for quite a long time. His business, his company is called Upcycle Stitches, I believe. And he also has I think he has an Instagram account called Sashiko Story. And it seems to me that his mission really is to, you know, deepen the understanding of sashiko and Boro outside of Japan. And it was somebody in the comments, Kimberly I think it was. Was it you, Kimberly? You're going, yes, it was me. It was in Kawandi Week, because he has got a little video about his thoughts on cultural appropriation. And Kimberly linked me to put the link to that video, and I went to look, and so it was at Sushi. So yeah, I mean, I'd only ever read his comments and thoughts on Instagram, so it was nice to go and hear him actually speak. And I'm not sure if he still is, but he was doing workshops. I think he's in New York City. He was doing workshops in sashiko, and I think he's now doing online. I think he went online during COVID, but I'm not sure if he still is. I'm having to stab stitch now because of that thick piece that I insisted on using. It's alright, you can get through again. Yeah, definitely need to do more of this. Just constructing a cloth from scraps rather than starting with a base. I mean, we piece when we're patchworkers, we make seams and join things together. I'm not making seams, I'm kind of patching in thin air. That's how it feels. I'm going to stitch on past there. So yes, what I kind of, like I said, I wanted to simulate, imagine over decades or whatever, a cloth's been created and layered and patches put over, and, you know, pieces like that piece there, that's more or less hidden on this side. There's a little bit still showing, and then back there you see a bit more of it. And I'm going to turn over, I think, and stitch from the other side, because I have a feeling that that this is becoming the right side and the other side's becoming the wrong side, and that's not what I wanted. And actually I prefer this side. And I do love the look of proper sashiko. The stitches are small and even, and you know, they take several stitches at once, or one takes, the person doing the sashiko takes several loads several stitches on the needle, then pulls it through and pulls the cloth back for the tension. And of course it gives a different look to the way I'm doing it, which probably would make Atsushi cry if he could see me. I hope not. I hope not. I mean, if I try, I'm not holding it properly because it's not a sashiko needle and I don't have the sashiko thimble. But do you see there? I'm showing you something. Look up. Maybe I'll try and do that just as an exercise while I'm painfully slow. Because I like to take one stitch at a time. To me, that's a mindful aspect of it, is, you know, taking each stitch on its own. But I'm going to run out of thread soon. But it does have an effect on how the stitches look. I'm going to have to get some new thread. I'm just going to try here. No, it's not, you know. Maybe try both. Maybe if you haven't done proper sashiko, if you haven't learnt or been taught proper sashiko, maybe just experiment with doing one stitch at a time and little rows of a few stitches at a time and see what you think. That tail's a bit long. I'm just going to cut some off. Right, you see I am trying to square it up, even though I'm trying to not try to square it up. Yeah, so the other thing I wanted to talk about was the creative process as a healing process. And it didn't really hit me until I lost my dad. The emotional connection. I mean, I had the kind of the positive emotional connection, you know, that when I sew, it makes me happy, that I enjoy it, that I find it mindful, that I have the stitch meditation scrolls and that practice, and but not that, it's not really a negative aspect, it's that I was so emotionally connected with the process of stitching that when I was grieving the loss of my father, I couldn't stitch. And I still don't think I entirely understand myself, what that was all about. Because it wasn't that I physically couldn't, obviously I physically could. It wasn't really even that I just didn't feel like it, because I did try a couple of times, but I just got too upset. And that was, you know, the only conclusion I came to was that I was too emotionally connected with stitching that I couldn't process. You know, there's a lot of talk and advice and so on, and for serious with the pocket, I could. It was serious. I loved him. He was serious, but he wasn't my dad, you know? Sorry, excuse me. See, now I'm squaring it up. Oh, well, I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to start here somewhere. No, I'm going to start in the middle somewhere. And yes, you know, I could knit and crochet, like I said, that was, and I made a lot of socks and a lot of crochet blankets and things like that because I had to be doing something. But I couldn't make anything which to me is meaningful. And it also seems strange to me that what got me back to stitching, what brought me back to stitching, was using my father's clothing, which I would have thought was even more too much, if you see what I mean, you know? But that quilt that I showed you, the Crumbs of Comfort cloth, that I didn't set out to make a quilt, I just had my dad's hankies. I cut them up, that wasn't easy, but I did it, and I just sewed 4 together and made a 4 patch, and then I sewed some more around the edge, and it grew to that, you know. I didn't set any goals for myself or anything. I just picked up 4 little squares and joined them together, and that sort of opened the floodgates, really. And yeah, you know, I enjoyed making that quilt. I don't know if enjoyed's the right word. I seem to be struggling to find the right words today. It was certainly cathartic and helpful and meaningful and so on. You know, it helped me process that whole time in my life. Yeah, so I'm sorry. I thought I would be able to talk more eloquently about it, but apparently not. But from a kind of, if you want my advice for something like that, or even something that isn't that meaningful, you know, just start in the middle and work out, I think is, it's like the opposite of Kawandi, isn't it? In Kawandi we start around the outside and work in. With Kawandi, the size of your piece is predetermined by your backing. With that piece, I've got into a real, I've pulled it up way too tight now, and I can't put it back anymore. Oh well, I have to stay like that then. Yeah, because there was no pressure on myself to make anything, you know. It started, and I'll say that now to people who say, oh, I start things and I can't finish them and I'm upset by that, and I've got a big knot in my thread because I took too long a thread, as usual. Oh no, oh no, might have to cut it. Yeah, don't say, right, I'm going to make a king-size quilt if you're someone who is upset by the idea of not finishing things. And you notice I say is upset by the idea of not finishing things, and not if you're someone who doesn't finish things. Because not finishing things in my world is absolutely fine. Because it's all about the process, and everything will become something at one point, and if it doesn't matter. It served its purpose, if it must have a purpose, by, you know, giving you joy or ease or comfort or whatever while you made it. Right, now you see this needs mending, so I'm going to mend it. And I only just made it. I'm going to come through to this side again, where I want it to be. Because I'm not talking about a right side or a wrong side. I'm going to put something there. Maybe just some of this little bit, maybe. Like that, just to bridge that slight gap. Because I knew in all that time when I wasn't stitching that it would help me, but I just couldn't take that first step. So if you set yourself a huge challenge when you're in that frame of mind, then you're almost setting yourself up to failure, and that will do you more harm than good. So that, I mean, you know, maybe everybody in the world already had thought of just start in the middle and work out, and then but it really, for me, was a light bulb moment, or whatever you want to call it. After I'd put a few rounds in, I thought, oh, you know, somehow I've made something. And I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't think it was until it got, I think at one point I thought maybe it would just be a little cloth, you know, a little small cuddle cloth. Just a little memory cloth just to hold in your hands, and then after, when it got past a certain size, I thought, well, now I want it to cover me. I want to be able to sit with it over me or round me or whatever. You know, as a real comfort cloth. I want to be able to wrap myself in it. But that didn't come until it was, you know, maybe 3 or 4 feet square. Up until that point, I had no idea what it was going to be. I was just making it so that I could work with my father's things. And, you know, hankies in particular for me were very meaningful, because I remember as a little girl grazing my knee and having him clean it with a hanky or wrap a hanky round it, or, you know, when you're upset because you've hurt yourself or because you had a row with one of your friends or whatever, and you know, Dad always had a clean hanky. My mother, you'll be amazed to hear, doesn't like ironing either. My father never worked in an office or anywhere where he needed an ironed shirt, so the only time he would need an ironed shirt would be for a wedding or a posh party or something. But my mother was never one to iron everything. Do you see where I get it from? But the only thing he insisted on ironing himself or having her iron was a hanky, because he served as a medic in the army, and he said that if you had a hanky that was ironed, the middle, that, you know, where it was folded in the middle, was semi-sterile, so you had a field dressing if I fell off my bike or whatever. So yeah, I mean, hankies to me were very much my dad, associated with my dad. And you've seen me talk about his silk shirts before, and that came in later life. He didn't really wear silk shirts when he was younger. So the idea of using his hankies, which had mended me when I was physically hurt or emotionally hurt, in that quilt, that cloth, was very. I'm really bothered by that pucker. I'm just going to stitch something over it. It's because it was only one layer of cloth and I wasn't gentle enough with it. I'm going to get some of this and stitch it over it. And I'm going to leave all that raggy hanging stuff there. I want to stitch it over it or behind it? Over it. So again, there it's very thin because it's that one piece of very thin sheet. So it doesn't have any holes in it, but it doesn't have enough substance on its own, so I feel the need to stitch a few more bits onto it. And also the thread itself gives substance, the stitching gives substance to things. You know, if you do cloth collage, like for example with the pouches or the journal cover or whatever, you pin all your pieces of cloth onto your foundation or invisible base them on or whatever, and then you'll feel a substance to it because you've got the layers. But then you start stitching and you really feel the substance is added to by the actual stitching. And I think that in Boro as well was that the stitching is as important as the cloth, because apparently cotton thread was available, so you could have really weak, fragile, old cloths that had been used and reused, and you could strengthen it by adding the stitching to it. And yes, it's not lost on me that this is all of that is absolutely laden with metaphor, isn't it? I feel like I need to fold that over. Why not? Why not indeed? Who's going to stop me? So now, what was on one side is now on both sides. Oops. I need to do some more stitching through there. I think I might even need to add a bit more cloth there. I'm liking the way that it's building up, and you can feel in the middle there where I've got, well, certainly where I had that thicker piece, but where several layers are overlapped, the structure that's got compared to obviously where it's thinner
Even there where there's 3 layers and there's only 1 lot of stitch, I know if I stitch that more heavily, I'm going to work over there because now I want to do that. That the stitching itself will strengthen that area as well as adding more cloth wood. There I am. Just work my way over. So, you know, just feel the piece as well. It's not only about how it looks. In fact, it's not at all about how it looks. And in Boro, you know, the farmer's jacket, let's go back to that. It didn't matter how it looked, not at all. It wouldn't have been thought to be a beautiful or smart or whatever garment. It was purely a practical garment. Like my dad's hankies. My dad never thought his hankies were beautiful. That was a practical item. And I think that when he was wiping my tears or a grazed knee or whatever, I don't think I would have been admiring the beauty of the hanky, but that doesn't mean that it was meaningless. In fact, the opposite. Do I want to cut that, or do I want to do more folding? Quite like the folding. I think I'm going to just fold it. Go a bit further. So I hope you enjoy doing this. I hope it doesn't, you know, I hope you don't think, what are we supposed to do? Because it's not really, you know, it really is sort of stitching in thin air. And only stitching. We're not doing any fancy embroidery or anything. And the idea, and when we're not trying, I don't want you to try to make something beautiful. It's purely thinking about the structure of the cloth and creating something that, if it wasn't just a tiny little few inch square scrap, would be useful. I think I'm going to come back to this side now, and you see I'm just jumping over, I'm not hiding it anywhere, or so I've now got a stitch going that way, but I'm just doing whatever is necessary to get my pieces of cloth joined together and try to not pull it too tightly. And I wanted to do some more of the rocking. It's interesting that I haven't really, like I said, I did that one Sashko workshop with the marked designs, but I'm not really someone who likes marked patterns like that. I like more, here comes the O word, organic style. But even so, I could do more of this when I'm doing straight line stitching, because it just does make it, you see there's a difference between that line of stitching where I did the in and out and in and out, and over here where I've done my usual one stitch at a time. So yeah, I would recommend that you explore that yourself as well, if you want to. If you want to. Right, I'm going to have another go at that. It's much more about keeping them, you know, I'm not here to teach you proper Sashko at all. You may have noticed, I'm certainly not qualified. But it's more about keeping the needle still and bending the cloth onto the needle. rather than, and you see then it bunches like that and then you pull it back out. Go and watch Atsushi do it. He knows what he's doing. Right, I'm going back to this side. Some more, I got my bit of worn. A bit of this. That's too much. So I just slapped that on one there where there was a space. Slapped it on. Slapdash. And now I think I'm quite happy with the kind of size of it, and I'm just going to keep stitching away at it and maybe adding bits on where it feels a bit thin. And I have indeed squared it up. Maybe I'll deliberately make it not square. I don't know. Right, let's do that again. That was only 4. And some bits have been completely covered and some bits are still poking out. And I'm just going much more on the feel of it so that it's got a structure to it. So I'm treating the stitching purely as a means of holding the layers together, and at the same time I'm experimenting with the way I do the stitching and how it looks, but that's completely an aside really. That's just something that occurred to me in the moment. And you really need a proper Sashko needle. This isn't long enough. Right, and have another little feel of it. Also, when you're feeling it, try closing your eyes and feeling it. Because if you take away your vision, your touch becomes more sensitive, in a way. Like when people are listening, they'll close their eyes, won't they, so that they listen. Better. I need more thread. Yeah, down here you see, I think there's enough cloth there. Just needs the stitch. So I hope that if you have made memory pieces from cloth that's meaningful to you because you know it belonged to a loved one or whatever, or if you've got cloth that you're wondering should I or shouldn't I, that you know it takes courage. It takes courage to do, and it's not remotely square, so I'm not really worried about that. So you know, I hope me telling you what my process, what I went through with that it's maybe helps somebody in some way. And it may not be, you know, I'm not saying that's the only way. If you're a stitcher and that happens to you. But I have heard other people say that they just can't stitch or, you know, do whatever it is their thing. And I think it's when you're so emotionally connected to something, you know, something like this thing we call slow stitching, that it becomes so tied up with your emotions that it's difficult to separate the two things. I hope I'm making sense. See there now, I just see a little line between those two lines of stitching, and now I'm filling it in, and that's not really what I want to do because that's going by how it looks and not how it feels, but anyway, I'm doing it now. Oops. And yet again I've got too long a length of thread. I'm not even sure this is sewing thread. I'm making excuses for myself. But I certainly hope you're inspired to go and see if you can find some pictures of authentic Boro. I'll have a look if I can find any links to anywhere online that I can put in the description to give you a starting point. Atsushi talks about to be Boro. And there's a jacket that I think his mother made that there are pictures of. I don't know, I can't remember if that was on his Instagram or on his YouTube. And he talks about the piece being to be Boro. So it's not a Boro piece because his mother makes it from, you know, vintage cloth, but she makes it as a garment from start to finish. I seem to be persisting in stitching in this really thick part in the middle. Let me have another little feel. I've got my eyes closed, you can't see, but I have. I think the middle is fine. I don't know why I'm insisting on going over and over the middle. I think I'm going to stitch myself out to the edge up here, and I want to make this edge a bit longer. What shall I use? I'm running out of bits. I've got this bit of denim, but no, I don't really want to use that. I don't think I really want to use any more of that either because I didn't like the thickness of it. I don't think I can get the backing cloth off. Let's try. Oh yes, I got a bit. Look, I pulled all the stitching out, but never mind. Let's stitch our way out there and then stitch that bit on. I think this is something I'm definitely going to explore more, doing these little in and out stitches. I might try, I don't have Seshko needles like I said, but I have got quilter's basting needles. I haven't got any here of course to show you. Have I? Is there one in there? Yes, there we go. See, that's a quilter's basting needle. That's super long, so that's it next to my normal tulip. And you see, it's about 3/4 of an inch longer. Maybe I'll try that. You haven't got the right thing. See what you have got. Let's try that. Let's see if that makes, how that makes the stitching feel. I have this for basting, not, you know, if I'm basting, not invisible basting, but normal basting. That's what I had those for. And sometimes I use it for bookbinding because it's quite long and it's got a big eye. If I'm not using super thick thread. Right, let's see how that feels. It's super long. I'm not used to the tip being so far away from my hand. But that's why you see you would have the Seshko thimble there, and I'm holding it all wrong. No, I can't get the action. No, it doesn't work. I'm going back to the other one. I tried. At least I tried. Going back to my tulip. It's funny, isn't it? I'm sure I could persist. It's like with everything and anything, I think, if you have to persist, but sometimes you just go, nah, nah, I don't even want to go any further with that. I'm quite happy with what I'm doing. It's thin there, I need another bit on top. Shall I have another rip? Oh, that's got machine stitching in, that's not going to come out anytime soon. Have some of this. Put that like that. And just stitch across the middle of it. It's very liberating not to be pinning pieces or basting them even. Just lay them in place, get a couple of stitches into them. And see where you end up. I'll turn over to the other side, I think, because there's a lot going on the other side that needs my attention more than that one piece on the front. I hope I'm staying in frame the whole time, if you're even looking. You're not busy with your own piece. Some people have said that I'm a fast slow stitcher. I am faster making these videos. If I think I was sitting doing this on my own, it would be slower. And that's probably a little bit because I'm aware that, you know, I haven't yet done a 2-hour video, but I need to, you know, we need to, you know, keep them, how many times am I going to say, you know, we need to keep them within the realms of reasonable, don't we? Now, I'm sure you all agree, because they're already super long. So probably that is, although I'm not consciously sitting here thinking, oh, I must get this done in 40 minutes, or an hour and 40 minutes, or an hour and a half, or whatever. I am probably subconsciously working faster than I would. Because I know some of you have said that you can't keep up with me. You try and stitch along and, you know, I'm finished and you're not. The other thing is, you know, those of you who follow Wonky Wednesday, when I made the bee, the stump work bee, for the box that I made with my White Rose of York, I made that following Marion on Marion's World, and I'd watched the video right through, her video, and then I got my what she said you needed, and then I thought I'll watch it again and I'll do mine while watching. And when she said she was going to go and do stitching off camera, I stopped the video and, you know, I did to keep pace with her, you know, but I couldn't keep pace with her. And I think it's because you need time. Marion had in her brain what she was doing. I've got in my brain what I'm doing, and it goes from my brain into my hands. Whereas for you, you have to, it has to go from my brain, out of my mouth, in your ears, through your brain. Do you see what I mean? It's got further to go, is what I'm trying to say. Because when I was making the stump work bee, I had to keep pausing and rewinding and saying, wait, what did she say about that? And, you know. But Marion knew what she was doing, I didn't, so that's why I was slower, I think. So maybe that's the same with you watching me. I've already thought about this in advance and, you know, got in my head what I'm going to do. I'm just trying to make you all feel better. Don't feel bad. But it's certainly not a race. And I don't think you felt bad. I think it's just an observation that you said. How am I so quick? So I don't think I am quick when I'm on my own, you know, just stitching for myself. I don't know. I don't time myself. And do that again. See, if I don't consciously think I want to do that rocking motion, I go back to my one stitch at a time thing. do like it though. This is a quieter side, and this is a busier side. I think I'm going to go back to stitching from this side a bit more. Don't know why. Don't know why. I just think that's what I should do. So this isn't even backstories because, and it's not certainly not pajagi, both sides, because the sides are different from each other. But, and there'll be a side that you prefer. I prefer the quieter side. But yeah, it's neither backstory nor pajagi, but it's a piece that has two sides. And when I come to put it in my journal, it'll be interesting to see which side I put up. You can all vote. I won't be able to hear you, but I mean you can all guess in advance which side you think, if you want to. There's hardly anything there to stitch into. I think I'm going to put something else behind it there. It's in a sense, it's very liberating not to have that foundation piece. In the same way that when I did my dad's piece that I showed you, it was liberating not to know how big it was going to be or even what it was going to be. I'm going to lay that there and just stitch through it like that, up to that one end. Because I'm not really making it bigger there, I just want to reinforce that edge a little bit. Because it's a bit flippy floppy. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that, and I'll just leave that hanging there for now. I'll come back the other way. And come back along the very outside edge. So here I can really feel that the thread has got way more strength to it than the cloth itself. It's like the thread is a scaffolding. And that piece really doesn't want to stay where I'm putting it, but I could put a pin in it. I don't really know why I'm not going to. I think sometimes as well, with the Manx quilting, if you follow Wonky Wednesday, or if you don't, Manx quilting is a log cabin type of quilting from the Isle of Man, where you measure everything using your hand. So it's worked on a foundation square, which is measured by the span of your hand, and then the strips of cloth that you use for the logs and the centre square that represents the hearth square are based on the measurement of your thumb and your finger. There were no rulers involved. Traditionally they wouldn't even have used scissors. They just had a knife and they would make a little nick in the cloth with the knife, and then they'd tear it, and then they had a needle, and that was it. Those were the only tools. And so I made it like that. I did use scissors to make little nicks. I didn't resort to a knife, but that was the only thing I did. Yet still there were a lot of people were very concerned that I wasn't squaring my blocks up with a rotary cutter. And of course you could. You absolutely could. Of course you could. I see people measure, that are doing Manx style patchwork. They measure their hand and their finger, and then they use those measurements. Also, you do you and all that. I just wanted to try and understand, as far as I could, not being from the Isle of Man or being brought up learning how to do that. I just wanted to understand the process as much as I could. That's why I do things like that. Even though I've got half a dozen rotary cutters and rulers and mats and, that's why. And I'm sure some of you, I'm sure most of you can understand that. At least I hope you can. But there were some people on the Manx on that Manx quilting video that thought I was peculiar and like I was being deliberately difficult, or I don't know how to explain it. And I couldn't seem to explain it to one or two people. And that's why I'm not using a pin now, was the reason for that whole long witter about that. That's better. I did fold that over. Yep, I'm happy with that now. Little thing. It feels so wonderful in my hands. Little thing. I just heard myself say that. It was with affection. I heard affection in my voice for this little thing. And that's good, I think. Do that again just for a little distance. In and out thing. I'm still not happy about that. And you know what, I'm going to stitch something over it. Why not? I'm not happy about the cut edge. Like I said it when I put it in there. I'm going to snip that because that's only a tiny bit. And I'm not going to put the needle in my mouth because that would be very naughty, and of course I'd never do that. Can't see the face I'm pulling because I'm telling fibs. Don't put needles in your mouth, it's very dangerous. I know that many of you do. I'm sure that many of you do. We've talked about it, and pins in your mouth. Well, we shouldn't really because it is dangerous. Right, I'm stitching something. I want something super thin to go over the top of that because it's already quite thick there. Maybe I don't need to cover all of it up. Maybe I just need to do it like that, and then maybe put some more stitching going that way. I don't want to stitch, I don't want to do anything other than straight stitching, although you do see in authentic, in this, here you see there's the big jumps there of stitching from one side to the other. And on this side you see that they're teeny tiny stitches, I don't think you can even see them, and it's done with blue thread. And they're a really big, that's almost like an invisible base because they're big on this side and small on the other. But then here it's more, they're more evenly spaced in that little area there around those holes, almost like a kind of darn. I have no idea of the provenance of this cloth. I only know it's Japanese kimono cotton. I don't know how old it is or anything about it. But I didn't want to start doing overcast stitch along the edge or anything like that, or cross stitches. If you want to, then, you go for it. But I just wanted to do straightforward up and down stitching. So I think I'm just going to keep stitching backwards and forwards over that piece that's annoying me, so that those cut edges sit down and blend into it. Just all the time trying to create one thing, rather than, it's not the sum of its parts, it's one thing. And that piece is standing up like it's not one thing. And now I'm working on it. And now it's become what it looks like, hasn't it? Rather than how it feels. But apparently I have to do it, so I'm gonna. Oops. I'm gonna have to stab stitch because it's now really thick there. But, it won't be. I don't think my intention was to have it the same thickness all over, just to have I mean, it wouldn't be, a garment wouldn't be the same thickness all over when it's been patched and mended over the years. But you don't want a really thick area and a really thin area either, or I don't apparently. So I'm going to stitch past the edge, I'm not going to just stop on the edge. And I'm going to come back the other way. Well, that's my answer to anything that annoys me, is to just stitch it more. The answer is nearly never to take stitching out, it's usually to put more stitching in. To pull my tail further through. There we go. I hope you all enjoyed last week, because it hadn't happened yet. Well, you know, I've made the video, but you haven't seen it yet. Well, you will have now, but in my world of in the past, you haven't. And yeah, it was a bit of an unusual one, the desert island stitching. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing the reaction to that. The interesting thing is I have made, well, this is the last video I have to make in advance, so I've made, at this point, there are 2 Mondays that you haven't seen yet. 2 or 1? No, 2, this one and last week's you haven't seen yet. And there are 2 Wonky Wednesdays that you haven't seen yet either, I think. But I'm seeing, although they're already made, I'm seeing things in the comments that are relevant to those videos that are coming, and I've already made them. Does that make sense? Or I'm seeing or reading people saying things that I talk about in those coming videos. And I think it's just that we're all on this journey together, and you know, there are subjects there are themes, and but a couple of times I've gone to respond to a comment, and in part of my brain I think it's on a video that you haven't seen yet. Does that make sense? Because usually I do these one at a time. You know, I make one in advance because of my Wi-Fi, boring. Monday comes, video comes online, I respond to your comments, you know, go through the week, and then I make the next one. And there's a sequence, a logical sequence to it, for me, logical for me. And hopefully for you as well. But this time where I've made, actually I made 3 in advance, but you've already seen Kintsugi. I mean, you know, I know that you've seen it, you've seen it and responded to it now. Oh, I'm confusing myself even more. I don't even know why I'm going on about it. But yeah, I've nearly commented and thinking I'm commenting on videos you haven't seen yet, or thinking you're commenting on videos you haven't seen yet, and yeah, it's been very confusing for me. It's been very confusing, but anyway, it's all good. Yeah, that's better. Do you see? Do you see? It's gone much more melded into the cloth, which is what I wanted. Yes. Right. Now I could do one of 2 things. I could either stab right through, or I could just stitch into the top layer. I'm going to just stitch into the top layer because it's really thick there now. That's much better. That's much better. Oh, I feel the need to use this thread up. I'm going to just do some of that rocking again. I find it easy to put it down to do that, rather than hold it up in the air. No, that's a bit thick. That's why I think I really would, if I was going to do that properly, need to have the Sashiko thimble. even though I don't normally use a thimble. Yeah, just there's another thing I wanted to say about my dad's quilt that I showed you. At one point, after I pieced it and I wanted to start stitching on it, what you would do if you were making a normal quilt is you would make your quilt sandwich, wouldn't you? And then you'd do all your quilting and then you'd bind it. I put it right sides together with the sheet, stitched it round, left an opening, turned it and closed it up by hand. I did it by hand. And then started stitching on it. So the stitches on the back will be visible, as you know, quilting stitches would be, but they're done in my usual way of not worrying about what's going on the back, so they're messy. Backstory. But before I started doing real heavy stitching, I did stitching all over, enough to hold it together. So basically at that point it was finished, in inverted commas. It was usable. I do use it already. So it means now that I can stitch on it again or not. I don't have to. See what I mean? So it's finished, and sometimes I pick it up and put a bit more stitching in it. So it's finished, but it's not finished. Make sense? And that's a very nice way of working as well, not to have pressure on yourself. Sometimes I I'm sad when things are finished, and something like that would make me really sad if it was finished and I knew I could never put another stitch in it. So I much prefer to make things that are never finished for two reasons, maybe conflicting reasons. One, takes pressure off you to finish it because it's finished, and two, you're not upset because you finish something that you're loving working on because it's never finished. If there's a square millimetre of cloth left where I can put a stitch, then it's not finished. So yeah, it's a nice way of working. And I think for next year's project, not to jump too far ahead, but we have talked before about maybe next year's project being structured in such a way that if you wanted to, you could make an actual quilt. I think those things will be being borne in mind during that project. I mean, that might change. I will, I like to respond to feedback. I take on board your lovely comments, and I take on board in the Facebook group and on Instagram what people say, and people who send me messages. And the things that you say to me and the things that I read do inform where I go next to a degree, do you know? I mean, I obviously can't respond to all of you, or there may be somebody might say one thing and somebody might say the opposite. Well, obviously I can't satisfy two things that are opposites, but what I mean is I do try and take on board what's being said, or if there's kind of consensuses of feelings that come out, or maybe they're just things that resonate with me, so it seems to me that a theme emerges when it's not there at all. So there was positive response when I said about doing a quilt next year, but we'll see. It might change, and if I feel that you've all changed or you've all had a different response, then but I do think that could work, because it could be done in such a way that you don't have to make a quilt. You could still make it as a, you could still make individual weekly pieces, or maybe monthly pieces. We'll see. Anyway, we'll see. And now I'm just putting stitches into spaces where there aren't even really any spaces. I just love that this little cloth has just grown from nothing, from some scraps. It's emerged, and it feels much more like an emergence than if I'd started with a foundation square and sewn bits to it. It just feels like an entirely different process, and I'm really pleased about that. Got this tiny bit left that I'm just going to use to stitch down this edge, I think. And although I could stitch on and on, I think, for many, many hours longer. I think at one point you have to say, enough's enough. So I haven't done a single knot, I haven't done any back stitches to finish off, I've just stitched this rather wonky and I think rather lovely little scrap that's under an angle, a jaunty angle. So I can put it into my journal. And I'm going to, I'm just going to write simple words this week. I don't have a, I looked up, I couldn't think in my brain of any poems or songs or anything like that. And so I looked up here and there for things to do with rags and mending and so on. And I couldn't find anything. So rather than press it, you know, rather than force it, is the word I wanted, I just decided to leave it up to you if you have something that resonates you that's to do with rags or mending or whatever. See, I felt then that I couldn't show you that because you haven't seen it yet, but by the time you see this you will have seen that. It's, yeah. Have I mentioned that it's weird doing all these things in advance? Anyway, so that was the end of a signature, and this is now my middle signature. Now, which way shall I put it? That way or that way? Oh, that way? I've got many ways I could put it. I wonder if many of you are shouting, if any of you are shouting, if some of you are shouting that way and some of you are shouting that way. If only I could hear you. I could do that thing where, you know, cheer if you want this side, cheer if you want this side, and go with the loudest cheer. I don't know. I'm going that side. And now there's people groaning. I'll use some of this still, why not? And this time I don't need to worry about... I find the right needle back again. Where's it gone? There it is. Don't need to worry about leaving a line where I can stitch it that won't show because there's so much stitching. It really doesn't matter. So yeah, so if you want to, you know, if you have in your mind something to write, then go for it. What did I write last week? I can't even remember. Oh yes, Robert Frost. Yes, I wrote A Road Not Taken, and it's actually The Road Not Taken. I haven't got a... So I'll just change that while I'm here. The Road Not Taken. I expect some of you have told me in the comments that have already happened, haven't happened yet. And I'll say, yes, I corrected it next week. Oh dear, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Right, where shall I stitch it? I better put a knot, I suppose, so it stays in my book. Turn it round, try not to get my nose in the shot, as usual. Is that one page? That feels like two. Yeah, there we go. I'll stitch it down this side. It's just easier. It's just easier than trying to stitch it along there. So I'm just going to write borrow, mending as healing, I think will be my words. Oops. And I will remember to link at Sushi's, well, I'll link his video about Borrow, which is very short, I think it's 10 or 12 minutes. And then from there you can find his channel and his Instagram and, you know, all the other stuff. And I'll try and find something online to give you a start in looking for authentic Borrow, pictures of authentic Borrow, if you're interested in seeing more. And I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed doing this. I hope it wasn't too unstructured for you. I'm just being a little bit careful because it's quite a thick needle. It's thicker than I'm usually using to go through my paper. Right, there we go. I'm just going to do a stab stitch for the last stitch, I think. Just come back. There we go. I mean, if you're making a wall hanging or a scroll or something where the actual size is important, you can make your piece and then, or, you know, square it up by adding pieces so it's the right size, or make it bigger and cut it down, or make it and then stitch it onto a foundation piece or whatever. I'm sure you can find a way. Did I do a back stitch? Can't remember. I'll do another one. There we go. No, I don't think I'm doing a dangle. Just want to leave it as is. Leave it as is, Catherine. Don't start picking at it. Right. So what's the date? I have no clue because it's not that date. It is the 19th. No, 20th. Yes, 20th. 20th of the May. Yes, can't even remember what months. 2024, 20th of May. Correct. I'm back from England on the 19th of May, which for you is yesterday and for me is in 12 days' time. K3N kiss. I'm just going to write Boro, which is B-O-R-O, equals rags. And then I'm going to write mending as healing. There we go. And then you can see the other side of my little piece as well. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed stitching it. That was one of my favourites to make so far, I have to say. And I look forward to seeing yours in weeks and weeks' time. I have to wait. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more cloth tales. Bye bye.